Welcome to Sizzle Fantasy Sports, the channel with the most sizzling hot fantasy takes and analysis, presented by your host, Gavin.
Rodgers, clean pocket, throws the middle to Yato, Devontae, touchdown, and a dagger!
How are we doing, everyone, and welcome into an episode that I've been waiting a long time to make here. It's our first annual Fantasy Football Award show here on the SFS channel, where today we're going to be taking a look at 8 different awards voted on by you guys, my viewers, in the community poll section, as well as having a little bit of my own input into the outcomes of the award recipients in today's video. So we didn't get around to this last year for 2020 fantasy football, but today, again, we're going to be talking our 2021 awards in the first annual SFS Fantasy Football Awards show. So I can't wait to get started. Let's not waste any time. Let's get into the first award. Alrighty, let me know down in the comment section below your opinion on the results of the polls for today's episode. Obviously, like I said, the majority of the outcomes of these awards and the recipients are based largely upon your guys' votes as the SFS community. Now, clearly not everyone was able to vote in these, but a large chunk of the polls did receive upwards of 600 votes and input from you guys, so that was really awesome to see, and I was really excited about that. I wasn't anticipating such a good turnout. So the first award up for grabs here today is probably the least coveted award. If you're looking at the players up on the screen, you're probably not on the makeshift ballot here. You're probably not all that enthused or excited about the players you see there, and that's because our first award today is the biggest bust of the 2021 draft season. Between Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, Calvin Ridley, Michael Thomas, and Allen Robinson, we'll quickly go through the ballot here and discuss the case that each player has to make for this award. Saquon Barkley obviously was a player, his ADP was quite high this season. And, he had the opportunity to be a RB1 this season. In some drafts, he was going in the late first round, in 12-team leagues all the way to the top of the second round. But the Giants' offense was such a disaster this season. It was such an implosion of talent, and with all of the different pass catchers and playmakers they had at their disposal, it was still a very, very disappointing season for the Giants. And obviously that was reflected. Dave Gettleman has just stepped down and obviously retired from his position as the head of football operations, makeshift GM, whatever you want to call it. Because of the struggles this Giants team has had, they haven't had a winning record at any point in the last 5 seasons. It's been such a mess, and that really influenced Saquon Barkley this year, coming off of that ACL injury. He just never really got on track and delivered on expectations for us. So he was a big-time draft bust this season. He was very underwhelming and underachiever this year. Christian McCaffrey, obviously someone who actually missed a large chunk of time. He missed over 10 games this season. And being someone whose ADP was the first overall draft position, that's something we can't overlook here. Calvin Ridley, a player who stepped away for personal reasons, was a second-round draft pick for a lot of teams in 12-team leagues. He clearly was an underwhelming player because of that lack of availability for our lineups. That's something that's important. Availability and dependability are some of the best influences and factors that a fantasy player can have for us. Michael Thomas, his shortcomings is obviously he wasn't able to play a single game this year with that ankle and foot injury for the Saints. He had surgery and just never made it back for us. It was a bit of a QB carousel for the Saints this year, so I think there's a chance he could have been on this bust radar, even if he suited up this season, because I don't know if they had the requisite quarterback to get him the numbers that we're accustomed to seeing from him when he's a healthy staple in that Saints offense. And then Allen Robinson, another player like a Saquon Barkley who just crumbled under the duress of having such a bad environment around him for this season. And just having the Bears, again, a QB carousel. We saw Justin Fields, Andy Dalton, and Nick Foles all make starts this year. Matt Nagy's offense at times was, and really not at times, the entirety of the season was a complete disaster. It was unreliable, and Allen Robinson was not given the football enough times for a player who was drafted in the middle third round of 12-team leagues. It was a very underwhelming season. So at the end of the day, the results, we polled you guys, and 49% of the SFS community. That's a winning margin of 29% over the next highest voted player. Agreed that Christian McCaffrey was the bust of the year, so you can see CMC with that trash can award. Obviously was a huge letdown. Just to highlight some of the most underwhelming parts of his season, he was the first overall pick consensus wide. His ADP was 1.7, so he was clearly the top candidate to go first overall in your leagues. And he played in just 7 games this year. So of the 17-game season, he missed 10 of them. He actually landed on the IR 2 separate times this year with a hamstring injury. And he played very well in the stretches and the stints that he had as a available commodity for our fantasy lineups. But he just wasn't available for the majority of the season, which was such a detriment to us. He averaged 14.6 fantasy points per game in half PPR, which is, again, very, very solid. He had 4 performances of over 20 fantasy points, and he had 3 of those games with 20-plus points without a touchdown. So he was playing very, very well, catching a high dosage of passes, but availability is, again, such an important part of fantasy football, and having players at our fingertips to be able to use in our lineups is such a critical part to our success. So the fact that he wasn't there for so long is why, at the end of the day, I think he walks away with the award for the bust of the 2021 fantasy season. Moving into our next award now, the steal of the 2021 draft presented by Manscaped. You can get yourself the seal of the 2022 new year by heading over to manscaped.com and getting yourself hooked up with the Lawnmower 4.0. Promo code Sizzle will get you access to 20% off and free shipping on site-wide products. And you can get yourself hooked up with the Performance Package 4.0, which includes this guy right here, the Lawnmower, again, 4.0, along with another assortment of goodies. You can get yourself some shampoo, some conditioner, some other great products. You can get the Weed Whacker, which is going to be a nose hair trimmer. All sorts of great products, again, at manscaped.com, presenting today's award, or this next award here, the steal of the 2021 draft season. Again, promo code Sizzle, 20% off and free shipping. You can get that access to the link to their website down in the description of today's episode, as well as in the pinned section in the comment section down below right at the top of things. So go check out manscaped.com. Moving into today's award, or this next award, excuse me, I said that twice there. We've got a great ballot here, 5 great examples of draft day steals that could have made a difference in your leagues. Leonard Fournette clearly became like a mini version of Alvin Kamara, catching passes left and right out of the backfield, scoring touchdowns, and being a very versatile asset for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. His ADP was 79th overall this season. Jalen Waddle could be considered one of the Rookie of the Year candidates, although I think Jamar Chase sealed that down the stretch of this season. Nonetheless, that's an actual NFL award here, not in our fantasy football award show. But Jalen Waddle, man, did he have a good season. His ADP was 131, so significantly lower than some of the other names on the list today. Cooper Kupp, his ADP down at 54th overall, so an early to middle 5th round pick depending on your league size. Clearly he had a great season, finished as the wide receiver 1 overall. Deebo Samuel could be another fantastic option here. His ADP was 85th overall, so moving even farther down the board from Cooper Kupp. And man, the hybrid wide receiver running back combo he was used as this season, the dynamic explosive ability, his physicality after contact. Deebo had himself one heck of a breakout season. We hadn't really gotten the opportunity last year to see him on full display. Obviously, he entered the season with, if you were playing fantasy back then, a broken foot, so that slowed him down. But he came into this year healthy, and he was virtually unstoppable for the entirety of this season, so that was something awesome to see as well. And then James Conner, another one of those underrated running backs like a Leonard Fournette. His ADP was 87th as well. And he was a touchdown machine for a large majority of the season. He actually led the league in rushing touchdowns and touchdowns from scrimmage. He eventually was surpassed by Jonathan Taylor, but it was quite the season for James Conner. Again, we had the vote here, and it was kind of a runaway. The winner of this vote won by a 40% margin over the next player, with 63% of you all voting in direction of this player, and that, of course, was Cooper Kupp, the draft steal of the year. When you're getting the wide receiver 1 overall across fantasy, the player with the most points scored this season, in the 5th round. It's hard to argue anyone else's case. If you ask me, my second choice would have been Deebo Samuel, who was that next best player at 23% of voting heading his direction. So Cooper Kupp, again, to highlight, he was the wide receiver 1 overall. He was a 5th round player in 12-team leagues, and he scored 21 points per game in half PPR scoring, which is a ridiculous number to be at. And again, was a great value for anyone that was able to scoop him up in the 5th round of drafts, which is quite exceptional. Even if you go back to last season, Devontae Adams, the wide receiver 1 for last year, he was a late 1st to early 2nd round pick, so you're getting a very drastic shift in the draft placement of where you were able to pick up the arguably most impactful player, and we'll get into that later on in today's episode when we vote on MVP or reveal that award and figure out who's the winner there. But there was clearly a great amount of value to be had here with Cooper Kupp. Moving into our next award now, the best fantasy quarterback this season. We've got 5 great candidates. We're not going to spend too much time on this award because we've got a lot of other ones that are interesting that I want to get into here. And obviously, I don't want to make this video too long. So we've got Kyler Murray, Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, Aaron Rodgers, and Tom Brady. 5 legitimate candidates for the NFL MVP award. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers is probably the front runner of that group, followed closely by Tom Brady. But I was very surprised as well when I sent this ballot out to you guys. The runaway landslide of votes that headed the direction of one of these players. We've got a variety of QBs who, Aaron Rodgers throws a lot of touchdown passes, not too many interceptions. TB12, a little bit more picks, but even a little bit more touchdowns. Justin Herbert had a fantastic season. Kyler Murray runs around all the time and gets you an extra added bonus of fantasy productivity with his legs, but he did miss some time this season. But the ultimate winner here was Josh Allen of the Buffalo Bills. He actually was very, very favored here. He had 55% of votes head his direction. And at the end of the day, it makes sense. Josh Allen finished as the fantasy QB1, so he was the overall leader in total points scored at the position. Now again, unlike a Kyler Murray, Josh Allen didn't miss any time this year. He did have 4 30-point performances in standard scoring for the fantasy football quarterback position. So in leagues where we're getting 4 points for a touchdown pass, 25 yards for a fantasy point, Josh Allen was the QB1 in that scoring. He had 6 rushing touchdowns. We talked a little bit about Kyler Murray and how that added rushing value influenced his fantasy productivity this season, but Josh Allen was able to capitalize that on just a bit more. Again, 6 rushing touchdowns for a total of 42 total touchdowns on the year, 36 passing TDs, and 4,400 yards passing. So it was a great season for Josh Allen, not quite as dominant and efficient of a passer as he was in 2020. Stephon Diggs pulled back a little bit this year, but overall, with the 4-headed monster of a receiving arsenal that he had, you add Dawson Knox on there to make it a really strong 5-man core between Gabe Davis, Emmanuel Sanders, Cole Beasley, Stephon Diggs, and Dawson Knox. He had a lot to work with. He did a lot on his own, and he had a massive ceiling for us in lineups this year. Now moving into an award that I had a great deal of fun, and I actually stepped in here and made a veto over the, I'll preface that at the top of the ballot here. We've got 5 great options. 2 Bengals, T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. Mark Andrews had a fantastic finish to this fantasy season at the tight end position, dominating almost every week. Jonathan Taylor, of course, the RB1 for this fantasy season, and really had a dominant stretch of 10-11 games down the end of this regular season. And then Cooper Kupp. So we've got a lot of options to choose from here. Obviously, going back into week 17, Jamar Chase had that 50-point performance in half PPR where he went for 260-plus yards and 3 touchdowns on 11 receptions against the Kansas City Chiefs. Just the week before that, T. Higgins went absolutely nuts for 37 points in half PPR scoring. So you've got 2 dominant singular games from them. But ultimately, as I said, the voting came down to it here, and Cooper Kupp was actually voted the MVP for the fantasy football playoffs by the SFS community. However, I had to veto that and go in another direction, and I will say I also weighted week 18 a little bit less than the other 3 weeks because the vast majority of us ended our fantasy seasons in weeks 15 through 17. I would say that the amount of leagues that end in week 17 is a far greater number than that of the leagues that end in week 18. So I still put some value on week 18 performances. However, the other 3 weeks and collective body of work is what deserved a much higher amount of respect and weight in this decision. In a sixth name, not on the ballot, Amon-Ra St. Brown is my 2021 Fantasy Playoff MVP. Now, I get some people might not like that I tossed him in here despite him not being on the ballot, but what I will say in my defense is I posted this early in week 16, so I wanted to give players the time to cast their votes early in the fantasy semifinals for those of you who ended in week 17, and you could of course go back and change your vote at a later date. However, the expectation is that a lot of people aren't going to do that. You cast your vote once and then move on with your life. So Amon-Ra St. Brown was someone who had 2 really impressive performances in week 15 and week 16, but not knowing what was in store for week 17 and week 18 is what ultimately made me reevaluate this and toss him in here as my own MVP, because nobody scored more points over that 4-week stretch of time than Amon-Ra St. Brown did. He was clearly the unquestioned MVP, and if you went out and watched or looked at anyone else's graphics or whatever the case might be for their fantasy playoff MVP, it was also Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I had actually planned to go and veto this prior and put Jamar Chase as my MVP after watching his week 17 performance, but I decided to post this video a week later and do it after week 18. Jamar Chase obviously did not suit up, and the performance that Amon-Ra St. Brown put in or on display in week 18, I couldn't go any other direction than this. Amon-Ra St. Brown finished as the wide receiver 22 this season, so a top 24 wide receiver and a wide receiver 2 in 12-team leagues off of the hot stretch that he had to end this year. And then he had 90.5 points in half PPR scoring in his final 4 games. That is ridiculous. Again, more than any other fantasy wide receiver or running back over that stretch of time. Ridiculous numbers. 10 plus targets, 8 plus receptions every game, and he had a low of 19 points over the last month. So you're talking about a guy who had a huge breakout at the most important time. Amon-Ra St. Brown is very deserving of the 2021 Playoff MVP award. You can debate me down in the comment section below, but I think that it would have been a crime to send this award in any other direction this season. All right, next up, I've got my award for the best fantasy football tight end for this past year. We've got 5 solid names on the ballot, as always. Just like that quarterback award, though, we're not going to waste too much time on this one. I just wanted to give some spotlight and attention to the tight end position because I found it hard for the majority of them to win any other awards here, since there are very few tight ends that are actually dominant at their position. So between Kyle Pitts, who had a 1,000-yard season as a rookie, only 1 receiving touchdown though, Travis Kelce, basically the perennial tight end 1, George Kittle, who had an incredibly hot spree of games early on in the fantasy football playoffs, posting 30-plus points in back-to-back weeks, Mark Andrews, who actually finished as the tight end 1 this season, and then Dawson Knox, who suffered a broken hand, but when he was available this year, was quite the dominant player, scored a lot of touchdowns for the Buffalo Bills offense, and became one of the waiver wire steals of the season. When boiled down to it, and when the votes were cast, Mark Andrews was the winner of this award with 72% of the votes heading his direction. And I think that the SFS community did a fantastic job of assessing this award, and I don't think it was too complicated of an award to delegate the winning votes to, but availability, dependability, productive points. I mean, he basically brought everything to the table and made it a very concise argument for why he is the tight end of the year. He was available and played all 17 games this season. Again, that is incredibly important here when you talk about Dawson Knox and George Kittle, who had fantastic performances but missed multiple weeks of time. That makes a big deal. Mark Andrews was closing in on a 1,400-yard season. He had 1,361 yards receiving, a very, very impressive marker for a tight end. 9 touchdowns, something, again, that plays a huge role in a tight end's fantasy value, is that's a free 6-point play there. And for a position that doesn't technically, or typically see rather, a large amount of targets head their direction, 9 TDs, and having that level of volume and productivity and that phase of things can be a very important role to be played here. So again, going back to the availability of playing all 17 games, the statistical production at basically every major point of productivity was very important here. And he simply outdid Travis Kelce from season start to season finish. He had more points than Travis Kelce. He was able to play more games than Travis Kelce, who missed a game with COVID. And at the end of the day, I think it's safe to say that Mark Andrews was simply the best tight end in fantasy football for the 2021 season. All right, this next award up here is presented to you guys by ThriveFantasy.com, my favorite place to play NFL prop bets this season. We've still got postseason action here, so there is still time left to play prop bets for the 2021 NFL year. Obviously, we're into 2022 now, but it's still a 2021 NFL season. When you head over to ThriveFantasy.com and use promo code SIZZLE, when you create a new account and deposit between $10 and $100, they will give you an instant deposit match bonus for, again, between that $10 and $100 increment. And as a thank you for signing up on Thrive and supporting their platform over there, I'll get you hooked up with a free month of SFS Gold when either you provide photo evidence of using promo code SIZZLE. If you just send me a DM in the free community Discord server, I'll hook you up with a free month of SFS Gold with our new system and platform that's going to be launching here very, very soon. So a very awesome opportunity to take a look at there and go check out. Again, if you put $100 in, use promo code SIZZLE, they'll give you a free $100 increment just for signing up and, again, using that promo code on their website. So go check out ThriveFantasy.com. Promo code SIZZLE, again, gets you an instant deposit match bonus of up to $100 when creating a new account. So this next award here is the best single game performance of the 2021 regular season. So unfortunately, Jamar Chase is a monster playoff performance with that 266-yard play there, or 266-yard game against the Chiefs, rather, and 3 touchdowns will not be factored in here. Rather, his week 7 performance of 8 receptions, 201 yards, and a touchdown against the Baltimore Ravens will be factored in here. Jonathan Taylor, of course, with his monster week 13, 35 touches, 240 yards, and 5 touchdowns. That is factored in today. Austin Eckler's week 11 with 17 touches, 115 yards, and 4 touchdowns, as well as Cooper Kupp's week 2, 9 catch, 163 yard, and 2 touchdown game. This is another one that wasn't all that hard to break down in the end. The guy with the most touches, the most yards, the most touchdowns, Jonathan Taylor with 5 TDs again against the Buffalo Bills, takes home this award for game and performance of the year. The only thing that could have really given him a run for his money, and I think that JT would have still walked away with this award, was Jamar Chase's playoff performance in Week 17. Of course, that would raise the question, who would win that if that was the case and considered here, but I would still go with Jonathan Taylor, and the voting was very much in favor of JT. I think that the vote still would have headed his direction. But ultimately, I'll let you guys decide that down in the comment section below if you so choose. I think JT deserved this award, though. Having a running back put up over 50 points in half PPR, I mean, if you had PPR leagues, you're getting even more there. It was a fantastic game, and I remember watching that live with JT on my team. I couldn't believe the fantasy points that were being racked up at seemingly effortlessly. He was getting goal line carry after goal line carry. I believe there was actually an opportunity in that game for him to have another touchdown, but that ended up not happening. So JT, fantastic season. Again, the RB1 for us this year. He will be making another appearance as the MVP award is the last award we'll be giving out today. This next award here is actually my favorite of the 8 that we've got for you all today and for this 2021 season. I want to spend a good chunk of time really talking through what this award means to me and what I want this award to mean to the fantasy community and those of you watching today's episode. So this next award is the 2021 Underdog Award, which in essence is a flex player that I think was largely overlooked and undervalued for the duration of this season. This is a player that was very dependable in lineups and was someone that week in and week out you had a fair amount of comfortability playing in your lineups, again, because of that reliability and dependability that they brought to the table. So we've got 4 excellent options that at points of this season had either stretches or elongated runs of that type of production. Now, we had some availability concerns with two of these players. However, and especially with Amon-Ra St. Brown, we had one hot spree, which we'll talk about at the end of the day here. We've got Cole Beasley on the far left as a candidate on the ballot. Amon-Ra St. Brown, who again just won the playoff MVP award just a few minutes ago. Hunter Renfrow in the middle right column there, and then Russell Gage of the Atlanta Falcons, who had a relatively strong end of the season, but at the end of the day wasn't, and this is a little bit of a spoiler, but he wasn't the most reliable piece on the board here. So you can kind of already cross him out there. Wasn't intending to do that, but very, very nice options here. Cole Beasley has had his fair share of high volume games with Josh Allen under center. He is the reliable underneath target that Allen finds when he's looking for a chain moving play or just needs someone to run a route at the sticks and get that first down. He's got multiple 10+ target games this year. Uber dependable. Again, Amon-Ra St. Brown, the player that, again, won that fantasy MVP award for the postseason and had over 90 points in half PPR scoring the last 4 weeks of action. And then Hunter Renfrow, the slot receiver for the Raiders, and all the drama they had this season, all of the injuries, all of the lost pieces offensively. He was a staple for that team. So by my opinion here, I actually agreed with the results of the voting. Now, I will say the voting could have turned out differently had I pulled this a week later than I did, because as I touched on earlier on in the video today, the polls were put out in week 16 in the fantasy football semifinals. And obviously this video is coming out post week 18, post 2021 NFL fantasy football season. So we're technically in the off season now. We are into Dynasty season, as I'll be getting into and diving into later on this week. And obviously the rest of this off season here as we move towards 2022 action. However, that could have, the timing of my polls could have changed the outcome here. But in agreement with the results, 63% of us voted for Hunter Renfrow as the Underdog Award winner. I think that Amon-Ra St. Brown might have taken a larger chunk of the votes away had I pulled this later, again, because of the impact he had. He actually had a 30+ point game against Seattle in half PPR, so that would have made a big influence, I think, on the results here. But to me, the body of work is what makes a difference and why I still would have leaned the direction of Renfrow for this award. He had 10 points in 11 games this year. That's something that's very, very fantastic to see. And again, the point of this award is to go to a player that for the majority of the season was that underrated piece, was that player that was almost sit and forget. And obviously Renfrow was better in PPR formats than standard leagues because of the target volume he saw. But he also had 11+ points in 4 of his 5 final games this year, which I thought was important because while making the case for Renfrow to win this award over St. Brown, something that was important, obviously, was how he finished in the fantasy playoffs here. And with Amon-Ra St. Brown having such a hot streak to end the year, it was important to me that Renfrow was able to not necessarily replicate that production, but still have a viable level of output, which he did week in and week out. He also finished as the wide receiver 11 this season in half PPR, which puts him in the territory of being a top 12 wide receiver in 12-team leagues, which makes him a wide receiver 1 for those purposes. So a very great all-around season. The average points per game was only 11.7, but again, it's that body of work. He wasn't the flashy player. He didn't give you an elite upside, but there was such a great floor value here. The target share every week, the red zone route running, scoring touchdowns, and being Derek Carr's safety blanket. Without Darren Waller on the field, losing Henry Ruggs midseason, Renfrow did everything asked of him for this Raiders offense, and I've touched on this multiple times this season in lineup videos or advice, whatever it might be. There's a little bit of Cooper Kupp here, and I'm not saying that Hunter Renfrow, and clearly the ceiling doesn't reflect Cooper Kupp level output because he was the wide receiver 1 this year. He led the NFL in targets, he led the NFL in receptions, receiving yards, but the route running, the shiftiness, the wiggle he has in those intermediate routes to just shake loose of defenders, I've talked about this a lot this year as well. Cooper Kupp and Hunter Renfrow had joint practices with Vegas and the LA Rams this summer back in training camp, and they kind of exchanged techniques and worked a lot together just as buddies and kind of exchanged tools of the trade of playing slot receiver in the NFL And I think that was great for both of these receivers and the production they had this season. And you saw that with a lot of similar routes, and they stole concepts and combinations from each other. And it was really cool to see and have that illustrated throughout broadcasts this year, and see just the underrated production that Hunter Renfrow had. So that's why he's my Underdog Award winner. Again, this is my favorite award because I think that some of these overlooked fantasy names can have the biggest and largest results reflected in your lineups, because having such a dependable piece that you can look at as a player who in over half his games has 10 or more points in half PPR scoring, that's something great to look at. So again, you could toss a Jalen Waddle into this conversation, but he had a little bit more of that flash and dash. You talk about the last 6 to 8 weeks of this season, he was looked at as a player who was essentially in the top 15 range of fantasy rankings week in and week out, and Renfrow just wasn't that. He might have cracked the top 24 rankings every week down the stretch of this season, but that was after he had already put the work in, and he was giving us nice numbers even before Darren Waller went down this year. So, and obviously continued and elevated his production down the stretch. So Hunter Renfrow for me, my Underdog Award winner. Certainly something I will continue to do here in awards videos in future years to come. I think this is something that is a very important thing to recognize, and a player that deserves a lot more respect. And obviously in draft season next year will be looked at a lot more, I think, because of the production and consistency he had this season. And then finally here, the 8th award we've got up on the block is arguably the most sought after. It's probably the award that you all are most excited to see. That is our 2021 NFL, or excuse me, not NFL. None of these players are up for debate except for probably Jonathan Taylor in the NFL MVP race. The 2021 Fantasy Football MVP Awards. We've got 5 really strong candidates here from left to right. We've got Davante Adams, Jonathan Taylor, Jamar Chase, Cooper Kupp, and Austin Eckler. These are the players that I think had some of the highest ceilings this year, as well as some of the greatest fantasy floors. Now, some of their floors are better than others. Some of these players have more so individually great performances, or multiple of them. In the case of Jamar Chase, he had 200 plus yard receiving performances as a rookie receiver, over 1,400 yards, just an all-around great season for him. Davante Adams set the Packers single season receiving yards record, and obviously him and Aaron Rodgers are an unstoppable combination. Jonathan Taylor led the NFL in rushing this season, and he had that 5-touchdown performance against the Bills. Cooper Kupp led the NFL in receiving yards, receptions, targets, all that great stuff. Had himself a healthy number of touchdowns as well. And then you've got Austin Eckler, that uber dynamic back who can catch passes out of the backfield. He had that 4-touchdown performance earlier on this season, as well as a culmination of other great performances as well. So 5 really strong candidates here, voted upon by you guys to determine the MVP of this fantasy season. And it was Cooper Kupp, the man who won that vote, and who probably would have received my vote as well, even over a Jonathan Taylor. Now, Jonathan Taylor is a running back, which in general is valued as a more valuable fantasy position because of the scarcity. But when you take into consideration Cooper Kupp's ADP, when you take into consideration the gap between him and the next best fantasy football wide receiver this season, the availability, the production, the ceiling, the floor, I mean, the gap between Jonathan Taylor and Austin Eckler is sizable, but I don't know if it's as sizable as the gap between Cooper Kupp and the next best fantasy wideouts. Kupp had 17 yards to go to tie or break Calvin Johnson's single season receiving yards record at 1,964. Kupp was down at 1,947. And that's just the start of where his great resume began. He had 145 catches this year, 16 touchdowns, so dang near a touchdown per game. Obviously, in this 17-game season, he falls just shy of that marker, but he played all 17 games. You go back to that availability factor. He was there for your lineups every single week, and his floor was fantastic because of the 191 targets that were sent his direction for nearly the entire season. He didn't go a game without dipping below double-digit targets in a game. His lowest, though, was 9 this season. It was a spectacular year, and obviously, if you had him on your team, he was going absolutely nuts. And I remember drafting him and expecting a very great year from him. in the offseason, and he was someone who in our drafts from this past summer, you can go back and watch some of the episodes if you'd like. I'm not really sure why you would do that because it doesn't apply to 2022 fantasy football, but I talked about thinking him and Matt Stafford were going to be a great combination, but in no world could I have expected the volume, the output that Kupp had this year. I mean, he blew away everyone's expectations, everyone's anticipated production by a mile. I mean, I thought maybe 12 to 1,300 yards, 100 catches for Cooper Kupp, maybe 8 to 10 touchdowns. And the numbers he produces are exceeding my expectations again by 600 to 700 yards, maybe doubling my touchdown expectations for him, and adding on another 45, 50 catches from where I thought he'd be at. So from someone I thought would be a middle to lower end wide receiver one, he was the wide receiver one. And again, that ADP, that draft price of being a middle 5th round pick in 12-team leagues was just the cherry on top. And if, especially you're playing in a PPR league where you're getting 145 points of production from those 145 catches, that is ridiculous territory. It was nearly impossible to beat a team with Cooper Kupp on it this year in a PPR league that had just quality pieces around it. Even if you didn't have the strongest roster, he himself could be the anchor that would carry your team to potentially the fantasy championship just based on how dominant he was this year. Really, the only thing that could get in your way in that case would be if Amon-Ra St. Brown was on the other side of the field. So, it was that 4-game stretch that St. Brown kind of overtook everyone else. But outside of that, Cooper Kupp was just unstoppable this year. I don't really know what else to use to describe the season he had than historic. It was nearly that of Kelvin Johnson. Now, Cooper Kupp came out and said that if he were to break that record, it wouldn't feel quite right and it wouldn't sit right with him because of the fact that it was done in a 17-game season, but I don't think that we should discredit the work that Kupp put in this year with his first season with Matt Stafford. So I can't wait to see year 2 with these two players. I think that they'll be, it's hard to expect Cooper Kupp to improve upon the numbers he had this year, but year 2, an assistant with the quarterback tends to improve his numbers at the very least. So maybe it'll be an up level of efficiency. Maybe Matt Stafford will take the picks down a little bit, but who knows? You look at Aaron Rodgers and Matt LaFleur. Aaron threw 20 more touchdowns in year 2 than he did in his first season. So not saying that Matt Stafford's going to throw 20 more touchdowns than he did here in 2021. I think that'd be ridiculous to say because Aaron went from like 26 touchdown passes to 48. So Stafford is obviously a little bit above that mark right now. So nonetheless, I'm really excited to see what Cooper Kupp will do in the 2022 season. Obviously, his ADP is going to vault sky high here in the offseason, and we're going to have a lot of conversations about how to value him in the coming seasons moving forward. But all the better. It gives us more content to make here at SFS, break down his value going forward, and there you have it. That was our 2021 Fantasy Football Awards Show. I hope you guys enjoyed. Again, let me know your comments down, or your questions, comments, concerns, thoughts in the comment section below, and I'll get back to you, start the conversation off. I'd love to have a chat. Again, a lot of these were voted upon and ultimately decided by the fantasy community here at SFS, although I did step in. I think it was 2 votes that I went and vetoed. Actually, no, it was just the Amon-Ra St. Brown for playoff MVP that I did my little SFS veto and stepped in and made the final say there. But then it was the Hunter Renfrow one, which I agreed with, but thought the results would have been different had I polled later. So there you guys have it. Go check out the SFS community Discord, free to join. We'll be doing DFS content here for the NFL playoffs and getting you guys set up with some great prop betting opportunities, of course. And then we've got thrivefantasy.com with deposit between $10 and $100 with promo code Sizzle. I'll get you a free match there and a free month of SFS Gold on their site for the fantasy postseason. As well as go check out Manscaped, get yourself the Lawnmower 4.0. Promo code Sizzle, free shipping and 20% off of all of your products there. And of course, click that subscribe button if you're new around here. Drop a like on today's episode before you head on out. And turn on the bell so you're notified whenever we make a new video this NFL offseason. It's going to be a great year. 2022 starts now, and I can't wait to get started. I'll see you guys there. Peace out.